Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Nichriadon, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Hello and welcome to episode 200 of Life Beyond the Numbers. Let me just say that one again. Episode 200. A milestone. And not necessarily one I set out to reach when I began this podcast back in September 2020. I certainly didn't get here by focusing on the numbers. I got here by following the joy, following the conversation. So in this episode, I'm going to take a moment to reflect, express some gratitude, to remember, and I guess it'll also be a reminder, both to me and hopefully to you, that joy isn't necessarily only found in the huge undertakings, the big lofty goals or giant leaps. But joy is to be found all around us, and it can be found so simply in the moment when two people have a conversation together honestly. And I'd extend that to even more than two people. So welcome to episode 200 of Life Beyond the Numbers, the joy of conversation. I've been thinking about this episode for a while now, probably since the beginning of the year actually, and what it would be about. And it wasn't until the beginning of this week that I really sat down and gave it some proper thought and reached the conclusion that it needed to be about the joy of conversation. And I'll come to why that was the topic that I settled upon a bit later in the episode. So once I'd committed to the episode, I took the title on a walk with me. I was in London at an event on Tuesday, and I arrived into Paddington and walked to the event. I asked the street for its wisdom, some pointers along the way that would bring the joy of conversation to life for me in a different way, with different connections and an unusual perspective. So I walked for about 2 hours almost. The distance didn't really require 2 hours. It was the way I walked and took notice of what was drawing my eye. So everything that caught my attention, I would take a photograph of and then reflect on how that tied into the joy of conversation. I took about 10 photographs in all in that 2 hour period, and I'd like to share just 3 of them with you now. The first photo I took was of a sculpture. Now you're going to have to use your imagination for this one, and maybe you've seen it. I'd never seen it before, but it was alongside Hyde Park, and it was a sculpture of 2 feet and legs up to the knees, coming out of the ground. So the knees were at ground level and the feet were up in the air, so to speak. And that just made me think about how wonderful it can be to sit back, put your feet up, and enjoy a conversation, whether you're participating in it or listening to it. And so that really spoke to me about the joy of conversation. The second photo I want to share with you was a photo I took of a sign that said, "Beware open voids." And that made me think about how somebody told me this along the way, that in radio, if you had more than 2 or 3 seconds of silence, that there was like panic because they just expected that people would start tuning out or adjusting their set, thinking something was wrong. But how when we're having conversations, that pause, that space between what you say or what I say, is necessary. It's a part of the conversation, that it's okay to sit in silence for a little bit. And a couple of episodes ago, Carissa, Bob and I covered this in quite some detail in the episode Hear the Silence Emerging, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. So I don't think we need to beware open voids too much. Silence or a pause adds something to a conversation. And it also reminded me of when I took a break from the podcast. The first time I took a break, I was probably going almost 2 years non-stop, every single week producing an episode. And I think I was a bit stressed about what would happen if an episode didn't go out. Funnily enough, nothing happened. And so that allowed me a little bit more permission to have a break every now and then, especially when I was writing my book. And also I realised, you know what? I'm going to do this every 2 weeks. So there is a bit of a void. There isn't one every week, but the podcast still keeps going. And then the last photograph that I want to talk about now was of a sticker. And I saw this sticker actually at the traffic lights. So I was standing at the traffic lights and there was this sticker. And I stopped to take a photo of it. And the sticker read, "Let me go mad in my own way." That feeds on very nicely to the last point, which absolutely brilliant. Do it your way. Go mad in your own way. And I feel like this is what I've done with the podcast, is I've just taken it in my own way. I've often ignored a lot of the noise around about who it should be for and what it should be about, how I should promote it. Anytime there's a should, it's usually not a good sign. And just continued on the journey to see where it would take me. So I've definitely been going mad in my own way. And in the run-up to episode 100, to that milestone, I kind of remember being amazed at getting to that number. And at that time, I did a trilogy. I took episode 99 to look back on what the podcast had been about and what it had brought me, and just looking back in general. And then episode 100 was grounded more in the present and what was happening. And then episode 101 was about looking forward, the person that I was becoming or where my journey was going. And so while I was preparing for the 200th episode, I decided to go back and revisit these episodes. And I wanted to look at, I suppose, the themes that stood out for me and how they're carrying through as well. And First thing that struck me, I suppose, is meaning over metrics. The core message of this podcast is always about meaning in people, not metrics and performance. About how people can create a more fulfilling work life. I mean, that is the question that drives this podcast. And it's not necessarily one that I have an answer to. I'm open to the answers, and there probably isn't only just one thing. And it's going to be different for everyone, if there is one thing, or the many things will be. But there's something about knowing what matters to you and being able to pay attention or notice what feeds you, what makes your heart sing, what nourishes your soul, where your joy comes, and to maintain, retain, keep a sense of childlike wonder and awe, which leads me to curiosity over certainty, because we don't ever really know what's around the corner, and embracing the unknown, not trying to control what comes next, but embracing the unknown leads us to where the magic is, where the meaning is. And I know we live life in a numerical linear format, 1 through to whatever, hopefully quite far into, maybe not 200, but closer to 100. But yet, life isn't linear in any other way, because there are detours and surprises along the way, and everything can change in an instant. And then the third thing was about moving forward over standing still or staying stuck. We have choices. There's always a choice in front of us, and we are always evolving. And I think perhaps the thing that helps my evolution is asking questions, not just to get to an answer. It's often about even getting to a better question. Something that sparks my curiosity, gives me something to reflect on, and that can then help me grow. And about moving forward, even if we don't really think we're ready, we might never see ourselves as ready, but committing to practicing something or having a practice can just make a world of a difference. And something else I was reminded of when I look back over those 3 episodes was what I talked about in episode 99. And of course, all of these 3 episodes are still available to listen to if any of them sound interesting to you and you've not heard them before or you'd like to re-listen. But in episode 99, I talked about the fascination I've had since I was a teenager with the phrase or the words inner personal route, or following your own inner personal route. And that reminded me of some lines I've written sometime last year on that very topic, and I'd like to share that with you now. Inner personal route. What if I already know exactly where I'm meant to go, but for some reason I've ignored the signs and signals on the road? This is my journey, my inner personal route, and each detour serves a purpose. Some even made me lots of loot. But each detour requires a transition, a pause to determine my position. The space between is bittersweet, finding a way to get back on my feet. And now that I'm oh so close to getting back on track, I'll forge ahead and follow my nose, knowing not what I'll discover or who I'll meet along the way. And some of them may be happy to pay me to help them uncover their own inner personal route.
Yeah, thanks so much for the conversation. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I've really, really enjoyed it.
And thank you very much for asking me. I've really enjoyed today.
I've loved it. Really loved it. Thank you so much.
What is it about a conversation that can bring joy, even in times of upheaval or when the weight of the world might be on your shoulders? I think that speaking things aloud, thoughts that are taking up space, and often on repeat, by saying them aloud and getting them out in the open, so to speak, it can often diffuse their power over us. That can bring a perspective. And in a way, we instinctively know that when we feel stressed, we kind of go, oh, I just need to walk it off, or I just need to get out and have a walk, get out and get some fresh air. And it's almost the same with our thinking. And of course, if you can do that in the presence of another person who is there to listen, really listen to what you're saying. No judgment, some curiosity, but mainly a presence, a witness to what you're saying. It's quite incredible. It's quite special. When you enter that space, that conversational space together with another person, you can pretty much ignore what is going on around you. And then you just allow your innate curiosity to take you where it wants to go, trusting that your inner knowing will keep the conversation on track. And there isn't really a track to keep it on, is there? It's about being with another person and sharing innermost thoughts and feelings at times, not always. And a problem shared is a problem halved. And there is massive relief to be gained for getting something off your chest. And I thought about this in relation to the solo episodes I've done since episode 101. There's been about 10, maybe a few more. And although nobody was recording them with me, like just now, I still feel like I'm having a conversation, not just with myself, but with you. And I'm hoping that you're having a conversation with me in your head. A conversation across time and space. Because I'm recording this on Friday, the 11th of April, 2025. Who knows when you're listening to it? And so there's a sense of intimacy that's being created across the World Wide Web. And by intimacy there, I simply mean into me you see. And having the opportunity to share some of the things that have gone on in my life, some of the things that I think deeply about, have helped me uncover my own sense of joy or meaning over the years on topics like creativity, compassion, friendship, well-being, writing the future, finding our way. So rather than simply relaying what happened or the instant that brought me to think about that episode, I like to go a bit deeper and discover why it happened or what meaning I can derive from it. And so I'm going to share a couple of clips from some solo episodes that, well, I'll let you decide what to take from them. Our life is made up of moments that merge together so easily. But some stand out for years. But I think it's not to forget the little moments in our lives that maybe we take for granted that can actually really have an impact on ourselves or others later. And a really simple example of this for me was about 4 or 5 days after the accident. On the counter near the cooker in our kitchen in Dingle, I found a small tub of broccoli that none of us had noticed in the previous days. Now, the broccoli was growing mould, and I'm guessing my parents had had broccoli for lunch that day, and there was some left over, so my mom had put it into a tub that she would put into the fridge later when it had cooled down. And she went out. But she never came back. She never came home that evening and hasn't been home since. Just over 6 weeks later, but she will come home. And I thought about the people who maybe don't get a second chance when things like this happen, or the people who those moments are the final moments. We all do things that we don't think about on a day-to-day basis, and we all put things off until later. But I suppose I found this fascinating, grounding even, how every single thing we do, no matter how inconsequential to us, might mean something to someone else, then or later. And the last group get-together that I was part of was 7 years ago. And on that night, 8 of the 9 of us were present. I can still recall the laughter. This year there were 7 of us for lunch. It was such a joyful occasion. As we sat around the table, shared stories, caught up with one another, laughed together, it was as if we'd been together last week. We were relaxed with one another, and before long the slagging and teasing started as we relived old memories. And yet at the same time, it felt like a long time. As we caught up, we could see how much had gone on in everyone's lives as we shared stories about parents, partners, kids and more. Not long after coming back from holidays, I handed in my notice and I left. And I left quite hurt, I would say, and disappointed and upset, and carried a lot of probably anger and animosity for quite some time after that, and fear, actually. There were a couple of people that I was afraid of because I felt I'd been undermined and bullied, and there were a lot of things that went on that contributed to the stress. But I also have to ask, and I didn't, what role I played in all of that. And that's the thing, I'm not sure, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I'm not sure that I had that level of awareness or maturity or self-reflection at that point in my life that I was able to take a step back and look at what was really going on there. Now, one of the greatest joys, because there's many flavours of joy doing this podcast, but one of the greatest joys for me is not just what the people I speak to bring into the conversation. It's also about what they realise when we speak. David Whyte says that poetry is the act of overhearing yourself saying something you didn't know that you knew. And I think that can happen in conversation too. And it certainly has in these 200 episodes. I mean, I've sat down with all types of people, brilliant, curious, open, generous people and asked questions. Questions haven't always been polished, or I haven't been fully prepared sometimes, but I hope I've always been present. A conversation is more than just talk. It's courage. It's choosing to connect to another human, and it's honouring the space so that what wants to emerge does. And that is what I've seen or heard in some of these conversations. It has been a place for my guests or me, or perhaps even you, to overhear, to notice, to be surprised. And again, I'm going to share a couple of clips here. The first is with Liz Jarman, the second is from Mark Hain, and the third from Katerina Moser. What comes out most for me from that, there's a lot of things, but recognition. I think the recognition is a huge part of who you are as a leader. We think it's a small thing, but like you say, that outsized impact is just incredible, isn't it? Because it's all any of us really want, is to be recognized for who we are and what we do and how we show up, and that someone cares about us.
Yeah, and I remember doing one of these surveys you do in your leadership over the years, and one of them was about how much do you need, and I actually don't need a lot, but I remember having a wake-up call that in my team at the time, somebody I was struggling with needed a huge amount. I mean, this must be 15, 20 years ago, and I remember her clearly, and I was like, that's where I've been going wrong. But it's hard because then you have to give recognition in a very genuine way. But I think that was a really pivotal moment in my career. I think you've summed it up brilliantly. I hadn't thought about it that way, that you do need to give recognition, even if you don't feel you need it in the same way.
When you read Mark's book, it is as if Mark is talking to you. You get that sense that it's a conversational read, which just makes it all that more tangible and easier to digest and feel invited into the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that, Susan. Honestly, that is probably the best compliment I've received.
That was very brave. You might not think so, maybe you do, but it was, because you were putting your money where your mouth was, so to speak, and betting on yourself. And I think that's a very powerful way to go in the world.
Yeah, that's nice that you're reflecting that back to me like that. It's true. It's like sometimes I think you're not aware of what actually are the steps that are really going to change your life.
So I like listening back to that and just how simple it is to say something that can help someone see themselves or overhear what they've just said about themselves that maybe they hadn't realised or they'd thought about but not put the words to it. And as I was thinking about the clips to play in this segment, I also thought about our own innate wisdom, our inner wisdom, and how we don't always take notice of that. And funnily enough, as I was writing the word wisdom, suddenly I had this like, what? And just realised that wisdom contains the words, do swim. Now bear with me, because there is something about getting into that water, safely of course, and just enjoying the swim, splashing about, going deep, even over your head at times. And that brought me to a metaphor that I had come up with a couple of years ago when I was on a retreat about what my life was like at the time. And the metaphor was, I think I probably shared this one before, but I was walking on the beach without swimming in the sea. So do swim. It is fun to swim. It is fun to get into the water. Do swim, and your wisdom will guide you. And of course, the other thing about the podcast for me, and many of you will know this, is that some of the ideas in my book, Leading Beyond the Numbers, were shaped in this space. Some of the people who have been guests appear in the book, and I share their stories or their words. And many other guests influenced my thinking, either directly or indirectly. And I guess all of them were conversation starters. The conversation doesn't end when the record button goes off. And I mentioned in the intro that I was in London earlier this week at an event. The event was actually the shortlisting reveal party for the 2025 UK Business Book Awards. And I am overjoyed. And to be fair, a little overwhelmed to reveal that Leading Beyond the Numbers is now a finalist in the leadership category of the Business Book Awards. Woo! And the award ceremony will be in September. So that seems very far off at the moment, but it won't be long coming. And the podcast also continues to shape how I show up in my work. Whether I'm coaching, facilitating, or collaborating, beyond the numbers, it's more than a business. It's a philosophy. It's my approach. So, as I said in the intro, I got to the joy of conversation earlier this week. On Monday, I sat in the garden. The sunshine has been phenomenal here for the last few weeks. Blue skies almost every day. And I've been trying to soak up some vitamin D and get some of that energy, springtime energy coursing through me. So I sat in the garden and I was looking at the numbers. Episode 200. 200 episodes that were researched, recorded, edited, etc. And okay, some of them have come from the archives and some of them were compilations. But it's been a lot of work. Since I went down to every 2 weeks, it definitely takes me less time to do an episode. I've also improved my systems. I've just gotten better at it as time has gone on through practice and showing up. But on Monday, they'd been up to about 12,000 downloads across around 90 countries, which is an amazing reach, over 5 years. And some people would ask, and have, how do you monetize that? Do you make money from it? And I don't, because I realised, first of all, the irony of looking at numbers when it's all about life beyond the numbers. But second of all, I do this for the joy of the conversation. And I also get to express what I want to talk about. And like episode 105, I get to create the content I want to see in the world. And that got me thinking about a listener that I bumped into recently who told me that the guests that come on the podcast are great. There's no idiots, I think that's the word they used, or no vacuous conversations. Of course, my response to that was, well, I don't want either of those two things. And this person made the point to me that a lot of the bigger podcasts that are out there, the big names, are often full of bluster without the substance. And that reminded me of another listener who told me that they really enjoy the depth of the conversation. That you can hear how the conversation almost takes on a life of its own when you're listening to it. And that reminded me of a previous guest I had on who posted on LinkedIn about how much she had enjoyed the conversation and that it was a real conversation. So when I go beyond those numbers, It is about the joy of the conversation and how much joy doing this has brought me. And then, funnily enough, because this happens quite often, more often than you might think, when I have a doubt about continuing, I usually get a sign that says, come on, you're not really seriously thinking about giving this up. And on Tuesday morning, I looked at my downloads and there had been 95 on Monday, like 95 in one day. A boost in the numbers seemed like a sign to keep going. And as I mentioned my walk through London and all the photos I took, one of them, I just happened to look up and there was a sign across the road that said, sheesh. And I burst out laughing, going, exactly, sheesh, you're thinking of giving this up? No, you're not. You're going to follow the joy. And actually, some of my guests talk about keeping going even.
It's always really fascinating to just have a conversation like this, because you don't in a normal day or a normal month or even a normal year. So that point of reflection, I think, is hugely valuable. So thank you for letting me spiel reflection to the extent it's useful. And thank you for doing what you're doing. Because as I said a few times, I think through this, it's more important than ever to sort of give people, from all of your guests, the tools and the thoughts and the reflections. It's hugely valuable. And listening to some of the other podcasts you've done, I think there's some really insightful stuff in there. So thank you for facilitating all of that. It's really useful.
Well, we're almost to the end. And before I go, I'm going to borrow some words from the late, great Frank Sinatra. And now the end is near. I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all and I stood tall and did it my way. Yes, it was my way. My own mad way. So you'll be glad to hear, I hope, that this isn't the end of anything, apart from the end of this episode. It is simply me letting all of you know, all of you listeners, that I am so grateful are coming on this journey with me, that conversations matter. And the joy of being in a conversation without a rigid framework or formula or even a final destination in mind is what keeps me coming back episode after episode. Joy has been laying down a trail of breadcrumbs, one that I hope to continue on and follow. So I hope, dear listeners, that you will continue to tune in and listen, not just for the joy of the conversation, but for what it might reveal to you. And I'm going to play out the episode with two snippets from Diego and Pete Bearder.
Just listening to some of those episodes, it got me thinking so much and reflecting so much about life and myself, and yeah, keep doing it.
Yes, the daily music of your laughter, and what a song you carry into the world, Susan. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for your tonsils. Thank you for showing your enthusiasm. Big love to you.
Thank you so much for listening and for sharing in my joy. Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.